Tonight, after weeks on the move across a tumultuous summer, Kamala Harris stops to take questions.
How should voters look at some of the changes that you've made in your policy?
Her first interview since accepting her party's presidential nomination. Japan's most powerful storm in decades rips its way across the country. The act of kindness that landed the Paris 2024 Fair Play Award.
We can be competitive, but we can also be friendly. We can be humans.
Ellie Black, Canada's all-around gymnast and all-round great sport.
From CBC News, this is The National with Ian Henemansing.
The make-or-break phase of the U.S. election campaign is about to begin. With summer almost over, voters will get more focused. That countdown to November, one reason that Democratic candidate Kamala Harris just sat down for her first televised interview. It has been a whirlwind August, taking the baton from Joe Biden, campaigning across the country, leading the Democratic convention. But all along, the pressure to take face-to-face questions was mounting. Tonight, she gave U.S. network CNN the first crack at it. Katie Simpson is with us from Washington. And Katie, what stood out in this interview?
Well, Kamala Harris breaks some news in this interview. Ian, she says she will not change U.S. policy toward Israel. Military support would continue if she's elected. Her day one priority is to make life more affordable for the middle class, and she'll pick a Republican to serve in cabinet. But her main goal here is to appear competent and confident. And to take some of the pressure off, she invited her running mate, Governor Tim Walz, to join her. Democrats see the race heading in a direction they like, and that is why the stakes are so high. And they're going to great lengths to minimize risk.
Momentum is building behind Kamala Harris. It's starting to show in swing state polls, and you can see it at her rallies. She's also running a cautious campaign, limiting her exposure and questions from journalists, trying to prevent a gaffe. So this first interview is being watched closely, and Harris is using it to deliver a message of unity.
Will you appoint a Republican to your cabinet?
Yes, I would.
Anyone in mind?
Yes, I would. No one in particular in mind. We got 68 days to go with this election, so I'm not putting the cart before the horse, but I would.
Harris also defended abandoning progressive policy positions, adopting a harder line on immigration, ditching her plan to ban fracking.
And I think the most important and most significant aspect of my policy perspective and decisions is my values have not changed.
She's the greatest flip-flopper. Things that she never even thought of. She probably goes back to her room and gets sick to her stomach when she says what she has to say.
Donald Trump has tried to paint Harris as a candidate who can't handle scrutiny, pointing to past interviews, including this from 2021, about failing to witness the southern border crisis firsthand.
You haven't been to the border.
And I haven't been to Europe. And I don't understand the point that you're making.
Republicans seem to want voters to hold Harris to the standard of a traditional politician, a norm Trump blew through long ago. In the past 24 hours alone, he's posted vulgar misogynistic attacks against Harris online, while his staff defended campaigning in a military cemetery, possibly breaking the law.
He sees himself as an orange wrecking ball, and he thinks the way to win this election is to double and triple down on his base.
And Katie, tonight we heard for the first time the story of how Harris learned that Joe Biden was dropping out.
Yeah, it was a Sunday. She said she made pancakes for her great nieces. They'd sat down to do a puzzle, and that's when the phone rang and Joe Biden shared his decision. She says she asked him, "Are you sure?" And he said yes. She says he offered the endorsement right away. She didn't ask for it. And in that moment, her first thought was about him, not her, a moment that completely changed this race. Ian.
Sure did. Katie Simpson in Washington tonight. Now to politics here at home. Poilievre called out Jagmeet Singh today, asking him to end his party's deal with the Liberal government. That would open the door to a federal election. Ashley Burke shows the strategy and the politics at play.
Riding high in the polls, the Conservatives' leader is trying to control one thing he can't control, the timing of the election. Now he's pressuring someone who can influence it.
Stop being sellout Singh.
In a new letter to the NDP's leader, Pierre Poilievre's demanding Jagmeet Singh drop his deal to support the Liberals and trigger an election in October of this year.
Jagmeet Singh is trying to delay the election until after February of next year so that he can qualify for a $2.2 million taxpayer-funded pension.
Well, that's kind of ridiculous.
Singh's principal secretary questions if this is all just a political stunt. Poilievre himself qualified for his MP pension in 2010 at 31.
Pierre Poilievre is focused on having an election because he thinks he can win, and he can cut things that Canadians care about. He can cut healthcare, pensions, EI.
Singh has maintained the NDP could end its agreement with the Liberals at any time if they don't get what they want.
That doesn't mean that Pierre Poilievre gets to make those decisions.
Everybody, thanks so much for being here.
This feud all part of a heated campaign in Manitoba.
Ready to stop the crime.
The by-election next month in Elmwood-Transcona is expected to be a competitive two-way battle between the NDP and Conservatives.
If Pierre Poilievre wins this election, he will come after our health care.
The NDP's playing offense with a new attack ad.
Vote no to Conservative cuts in Elmwood-Transcona.
Jagmeet Singh is used to getting what he wants.
This after a Conservative ad this summer went after Singh.
Rolex watches, BMWs.
As for the Liberals, they've dismissed any suggestion their deal with the NDP is at risk.
We need to really take these assertions by the Conservative leader with a very healthy grain of salt.
So, Ashley, if nothing changes, we would expect the election next year.
Yeah, Ian, the Liberal House leader said earlier this week she's fairly confident the deal with the NDP will last until next June. Now, if that happens, there won't be an election until at the earliest next summer. The Liberals hope by then the cost of living will be more affordable and the economy stronger to help turn around the political tide. This after a year of the worst polling since the party formed government in 2015.
Ashley Burke in Ottawa. With less than 2 months until the provincial election in BC, there's growing fallout tonight after the collapse of the official opposition party. Susanna De Silva shows us how the race is changing and what it all means for BC voters.
Even in end-of-summer mode, enjoying the food and the sunshine, the announcement that flipped BC politics on its head was top of mind.
Oh, wasn't that something, hey? It's never boring. We certainly put the U.S. on the back burner now for a couple of days.
Well, it's disappointing that now we only have two choices, so it's kind of bipolarizing.
Recent polls suggested about 10% of the decided voters in these crowds would have supported BC United.
It is a close race, and so if the BC Conservatives are able to get a big chunk of that 10%, they might be able to pull ahead of the NDP.
But the tone of the political discourse may shake out the vote in unexpected ways.
Because right now the center has been abandoned, and if you're looking at where voters stand right now, the NDP might actually represent more of the center for a lot of those voters than do the BC Conservatives.
And a leader who doesn't believe that climate change is real, that doesn't think we should be taking climate action.
Already today, BC's Premier painting the Conservatives as extreme, while BC Conservative leader John Rustad called that misleading.
When we come out with our full platform and people see the things that we stand for, I think people have a better sense of who we are.
A platform still to come, along with the list of candidates.
This has been a really tough decision for me to make.
Already, 2 high-profile BC United MLAs and former cabinet ministers have dropped out.
There's a lot of people where the jury's out. They're going to actually watch and listen and engage and see what the BC Conservatives actually end up offering British Columbians.
With 7 weeks left, not a lot of time to sort things out.
When it comes to election, that's when I open my newspaper and I search my candidates for the area that's best for my community.
No, I'm just enjoying my patio as PNE, and I'll think about things that are of lesser importance tomorrow.
With summer fun ending, the countdown to Election Day is on. Susanna De Silva, CBC News, Vancouver.
And there's more to come on this story tonight. A little later, I'll be joined by political analyst Sachi Curl and former BC Federal Cabinet Minister James Moore to break down the developments. A newly activated earthquake early warning system in BC will send out alerts through cell phones, TVs, and radios just ahead of the seismic waves.
Earthquake early warning will provide seconds to tens of seconds of warning to over 10 million people in Canada before the arrival of strong shaking.
The system will be expanded to include parts of Quebec and Ontario later this year. New restrictions on nicotine pouches came into effect on Wednesday, and there's already a backlash. The rules are designed to protect young people, but some smokers trying to quit say the products help them, and the new measures are an overreaction. Marina von Stackelberg has been following this story.
29-year-old Zach Lang has been smoking since he was a teenager. So when flavored nicotine pouches appeared in convenience stores a year ago, he says they felt safer than cigarettes.
To me, it always felt like the nicotine pouches were sort of the lesser of two evils.
The small white packet, which goes by the brand name Zonic, is placed between a person's cheek and gums. That releases what doctors say is the nicotine equivalent of smoking multiple cigarettes, but with no tobacco.
I really liked them. I mean, they didn't make me feel ill like tobacco products would at times.
Lang says he understands the need to keep them away from children, but says the new restrictions go too far. Now that nicotine pouches are unavailable in convenience stores, even to adults.
I can't understand why, actually. Why can't you cancel cigarettes?
Now those bright-colored packages enticing to kids are off the shelves, something health advocates argued for.
We can't expect a gas station attendant to provide smoking cessation advice the way we can from a health professional.
Only mint can be bought from a pharmacist. Fruity flavors are completely recalled. Some say that could make it harder for those who are using Zonic to quit.
Often adult smokers trying to quit will pick fruitier flavors or flavors that are not mint or not tobacco flavor.
The maker of Zonic, Imperial Tobacco, argues the ban could also encourage an illegal market.
I remind everybody that we are the only approved nicotine pouch in Canada.
Canada's health minister says unlike other products already authorized to help you quit smoking, like nicotine gum or patches, these pouches were targeting youth. And some teenagers who had never smoked a cigarette before were trying them. That's why he says these restrictions need to be so tough. Marina von Stackelberg, CBC News, Ottawa.
And British smokers may soon find fewer places to light up. The government is considering a ban that could include outdoor spaces at pubs and restaurants. The Prime Minister cited the strain on healthcare resources. Around 80,000 people in the UK die from smoking every year. The World Health Organization says it secured humanitarian pauses in Gaza, allowing it to carry out a desperately needed polio vaccination campaign.
We have a preliminary commitment for area-specific humanitarian pauses.
Beginning September 1st, Israel and Hamas will pause fighting in certain parts of Gaza so the campaign can reach more than 600,000 children. The WHO expects another pause for a second dose a month later.
When we start this process, we have to finish this process.
After days of heavy fighting, Israel canceled an evacuation order for one part of Gaza, allowing staff to return to UN warehouses and residents to return to what's left of their homes. It's completely destroyed, says this man. Now we're living on the streets. I have an infant son, and my wife is pregnant. Elsewhere, the carnage continues. Local medical teams say this Israeli airstrike in Nuseirat killed 8 people. And Israeli forces continued their large-scale operation in the occupied West Bank. The 2-day death toll, at least 16. Israel's defense minister said he wants to expand the goals of the war to include securing the country's north. It's now mostly evacuated under the threat of the Lebanese militant group Hezbollah. But Sasha Petrusik found residents who remain and are willing to risk a wider war if it means an end to the rockets.
Her house is a disaster zone. Her appliances a melted mess. But Yelena Lipschitz survived last week's attack from Lebanon. First a siren, then boom, boom, a rocket hitting next door, she says. I'd move, but my life is in Katrin. In the occupied Golan Heights, it's the biggest Israeli settlement. And a huge target for the militant group Hezbollah, just 20 kilometers away in Lebanon. Rocket and drone fragments dot the landscape, mostly shot down by Israel's defenses, but still unnerving for those who've stayed since last October.
There is a low-level, constant anxiety. Obviously, we hear jets, we hear booms every single night.
45 other towns closer to Hezbollah's busy launchers have been evacuated, including Majd al-Shams, where 12 children were killed in a single strike on a soccer field.
The Israeli government has called this unsustainable, but there aren't many good options. Either people up here continue to live with the threat of drones and rockets hanging over them, or Israel invades southern Lebanon, as it has in the past. That would bring war here, though. Are you prepared for that?
We prepare to that. We prepare the shelters, we prepare the people, we prepare everybody for that. We know it can be. So we have to destroy the Hezbollah, we have to kill them.
It's been tried before, say experts.
But I don't think it's a magic solution. If we will do this, we will damage the capabilities of Hezbollah for a few years. But it's not going to be for once and for all.
But for now, no one is predicting when it'll be safe for more than 60,000 Israelis displaced from the north to return. Sasha Petrusik, CBC News, Katrin.
Tonight, parts of Japan are grappling with widespread damage after Typhoon Shanshan made landfall. This is one of the strongest storms to hit the country in years. Ithel Musa shows us the devastating impact.
Making landfall Thursday morning, Typhoon Shanshan thrashed southwest Japan with torrential rain and wind gusts strong enough to blow over moving trucks. This typhoon is scary, says Norimasa Sankonashita. In terms of disaster, we're getting a large amount of rain, he said. Major storms are common in Japan, but Shanshan, one of the most powerful to hit the country in decades, sparked a rare special warning. Authorities urging millions to evacuate, warning of landslides and severe flooding. More than 800 millimeters of rain forecasted in one region. Combined with wind gusts of up to 180 kilometers an hour, the impacts were devastating. At least 4 confirmed dead so far, dozens injured, and damage widespread. The storm cut off power to hundreds of thousands of homes, halted trains, buses, and ferries, and caused the cancellation of hundreds of flights.
I'm concerned because I obviously do not want to miss our flights back to New York. So if the power failures really continue to go on for the next couple of days, then we'll be stuck here a little bit longer.
Factories and car manufacturers like Honda, Nissan, and Toyota were also forced to suspend operations in the path of the storm. Shanshan has now weakened to a severe tropical storm, but there are fears it could still trigger floods and landslides as it slowly moves north toward Tokyo in the next few days. Ithel Musa, CBC News, Toronto.
With several provincial elections coming up, there's concern over the potential threat of foreign interference.
These activities could decrease trust in our elections or even suppress voter participation.
Are the provinces ready? Plus, Canada's Ellie Black gets an Olympic surprise back home in Halifax.
And I was like, what? And he's like, wait, you don't know?
And a podium finish at the Paralympic Games.
And she will cross the line.
The bronze that put Canada on the board. We're back in 2. That fire is burning an unusual fuel. 2 tons of seized drugs set ablaze by authorities in the Dominican Republic. More than half of it was cocaine discovered in a shipment of limes coming from Colombia. It's set to be a busy fall for provincial elections with contests in BC, Saskatchewan, and New Brunswick. But a growing threat is hanging over those races: foreign interference. Catherine Tunney looks into whether provinces are prepared.
3 provinces are preparing for elections this fall. But before millions vote, officials are watching for foreign meddling. Canada's spy agency has repeatedly warned that foreign states are interfering in provincial politics. And a top-secret report from a group of parliamentarians recently named China and Pakistan as known aggressors, interfering with provincial nomination races and fundraising for preferred candidates. But the ability of provinces to defend against it is limited.
They wouldn't have the ongoing capacity, to deal with the new threats of cybersecurity and disinformation campaigns.
When it comes to combating disinformation, BC is leading the way with new laws to fight it.
Things like, deepfake audio, video, or images would be restricted in our elections.
A big concern for BC's chief electoral officer lies about the election itself. For example, an apparently legitimate AI-generated video falsely telling voters the day of the election has changed.
These activities could decrease trust in our elections, in our democratic institutions, or even suppress voter participation. So, those are my concerns. I think these are real risks.
Under the new provincial law, social media platforms can be made to take down posts containing disinformation or face $50,000 a day in fines. But the picture is different in Saskatchewan.
I don't have that, so instead I come back to best practice. And I have the power of the bully pulpit. I can be transparent about what is unfolding.
In New Brunswick, officials are promising to educate voters as best they can about disinformation.
I think with most threats, people are a little bit innocent and complacent until something happens.
His message to all of Canada's premiers: pass tougher disinformation laws now to ward off foreign influence before it's too late. Catherine Tunney, CBC News, Ottawa.
Canadian gymnast Ellie Black has won the Olympic Games Sportsmanship Award.
We can be competitive, but we can also be friendly. We can be humans.
The act of kindness that put her over the top. Plus, with BC United out, the new 2-horse race is about to get heated.
We are now going to see a reintroduction of the culture wars.
How the political shakeup could reshape the campaign. And who's really paying for new tariffs on China?
It comes at a cost to consumers.
The National breaks down the story shaping our world. Next.
And she got better here. She's just up. And she will cross the line.
Calgary's Kate O'Brien pedaled her way to the podium in Paris as Canada captured its first medal at the 2024 Paralympic Games. The 36-year-old O'Brien won bronze in her para-track cycling event. She won silver 3 years ago in Tokyo. As the Paralympic Games got underway, there was one award from the Olympic Games still to be handed out. It's given to the athlete who best displayed fair play. The winner, Canadian gymnast Ellie Black. Nicolas Seguin talked to her about the honor.
The cell phone video of this tender moment captured another side of the Olympic spirit. Canadian gymnasts Ellie Black and Shallon Olsen consoling their French opponent after her devastating falls. Posted on social media, this kindness got the world's attention.
We can be competitive, but we can also be friendly. We can be humans.
From among thousands of athletes, that act of humanity earned Black the Paris 2024 Fair Play Award. The 4-time Olympian led the Canadian team to a 5th-place finish and placed 6th in the individual all-around competition. But along with her skill on the uneven bars, she's long been known for something else.
She's very fun. She always keeps the energy really high. She always has a smile on her face.
I like the pink on that sweater.
Black was here at her gym on Wednesday when she heard she won the award, which honors extraordinary acts of sporting spirit.
One of the athletes here was just kind of making a joke about, oh, I know the person who won. And I was like, what? And he's like, wait, you don't know?
Black was nominated by fans and other athletes on social media. Then she was chosen as one of 5 finalists by an international jury. Tens of thousands of people cast their votes to determine the winner, and Black came out on top.
Her attitude from kind of minute 0 to the last seconds of those competitions, she really radiated selflessness, kindness.
Black says she learned these values from coaches and teammates throughout her life.
1, 2, 3.
Now, working with young gymnasts, she hopes to inspire them to also put kindness first. Nicola Sagan, CBC News, Halifax.
Now it's time to dig deeper into the stories shaping our world. Tensions between trading partners after Canada slaps a 100% tariff on Chinese-made electric vehicles.
China has an intentional, state-directed policy of overcapacity and oversupply.
Could the move to limit China's marketplace advantage quell consumers' desire for change? But first,
this is hard. It's really hard.
The dramatic shift in BC politics molds a new political landscape as the leader of BC's former Liberal Party calls off his party's campaign and throws its support behind the Conservatives. This is a seismic political shift. BC United, under its old name, the BC Liberals, governed the province from 2001 to 2017. Suddenly, less than 2 months before the election, they've shut down. Shachi Kurl is the president of the Angus Reid Institute, and James Moore is a former Conservative federal cabinet minister from British Columbia. James, let me start with you. How would you describe what's happened here?
3 to 6 months ago, I would have said that the NDP were probably a shoo-in to be re-elected. Now I would say it's about an even split over what the outcome will be. I mean, this is dramatic. It's not uncommon, certainly on the free enterprise side of the ledger in BC politics, for there to be shifts. We've had Socreds, Conservatives, BC Reform, BC Liberal, BC United, now back to the Conservative Party of British Columbia. I think the center-right coalition, broadly speaking, the free enterprise coalition, is pretty agnostic when it comes to label, but when they unite under one tent, they're a powerful political force, and they win most of the elections in British Columbia.
And Shachi, same question to you, just in terms of putting this in perspective, especially for people outside of BC, what would you say?
Well, it definitely represents a pretty historic reset in terms of the fact that this is a requiem for what was the BC Liberals, now BC United, a party that was at one point an undefeatable, indefatigable juggernaut in BC politics that reigned supreme for the better part of 2 decades. And it is no more. What has reformed in its place, almost Terminator 2 style, right? It's the liquid molten metal that just keeps reforming and coming back, is a party that is now going to pose the most significant challenge to the BC NDP since 2017, since they took power back after a very, very long term in opposition. And what's significant this time is that while the BC Liberals / BC United were a center-right coalition, this is very much a right-center coalition. And so we see the party has moved further to the right, this new thing, whatever it's going to be, but it's going to leave the NDP fighting for every vote, particularly in Metro Vancouver, where this thing will be decided. It is very much now a rural-urban battle, a battle divided along age lines and age demographics, and a battle very, very much concentrated in the suburbs outside of the city of Vancouver.
So, Shachi, the plan here, of course, on the part of BC United and a lot of people who support right-of-centre parties, is that their supporters will go to the Conservatives and defeat the NDP. Sounds like you don't think it's as straightforward as that.
Well, to start with, we knew even going in months before this happened, because the conversations between BC United and the BC Conservatives have been going on for months, that about half of BC United supporters, and this was an ever-shrinking base day by day, but among those who were left and saying, yes, they'll stick with BC United, about half said, look, if there's no other choice, we'll move over to the BC Conservatives, no problem. So the big question along the margins now, and this is a game of inches, is what happens to that other half? Do they shrug their shoulders and also migrate over to the BC Conservatives, because for them the prospect of another term under the BC NDP is not palatable to them? Are there those that simply stay home because they feel orphaned? Are there those that also maybe actually cast their lot in with the NDP because their perception of the party under John Rustad, the BC Conservatives, is a party that's too extreme for their tastes? We are now going to see a reintroduction of the culture wars into this campaign, and we are going to see really where does that last remaining 5% of the BC United vote end up going, and that may end up being the deciding factor in who wins this.
James, I would guess the partisan part of you, or your former federal Conservative MP, is happy to see a united right opposition to the NDP. But more broadly, are you concerned about this increased polarization overnight, basically, in BC politics, a very left-of-centre party and an even further right-of-centre party?
Well, I mean, that's frankly been most of the tradition to the sweep of British Columbia's history, right? Is that you have a broad center-right coalition and a broad center-left or relatively center-left coalition of the New Democrats, and then you fight over the middle 10-20% of the ground. Some of that has gotten blurred with populist politics and the left and right, economics, inflation, and a lot of the cultural issues that Shachi talks about. A lot of traditional New Democrat voters are not particularly pleased with high price of gas and sort of open drug use in the city of Vancouver and elsewhere, and that kind of crosses over that left-right divide. But yeah, look, I think it's healthy for a democracy to have a clear choice and a clear alternative. To Shachi's point, though, that whenever you have a merger like this or a combination like this, you hope when you're on the combination side that 1 + 1 doesn't just equal 2; it equals 2.5 or even 3. There will be some supporters traditionally of the BC Liberals who may not come aboard, but you hope that there are a lot of people who may have checked out of politics, feeling that the center right has become hopeless, that may now be reanimated to re-enter the race and re-enter their voting habits, and that's where the opportunity is presented to John Rustad and the Conservatives to put forward a meaningful platform with credible spokespeople and potential cabinet ministers, such that British Columbians can think that their vote really matters again, that there is a real competition, and competition is a good thing in a democracy.
Shachi, is it possible that personalities and politics don't matter here, that it's just about a name? I mean, the Conservatives had less than 2% of the support in the last provincial election, but that brand seems golden right now.
It really does seem golden, and it has been a moment to watch the federal Conservatives cut a swath through British Columbia and the battlegrounds. But this is also about issues surrounding the level of dissatisfaction the British Columbians are feeling towards the BC NDP. When you look at the issues that are most important to BC voters, access to health care, cost of living, housing affordability, these are the things that British Columbians are pretty unhappy about. But the big question then becomes, do they feel so strongly that they are going to cross the street ideologically over to the BC Conservatives? And can the BC Conservatives sort of make the case for change? These are the things that are going to define this campaign.
Tough time for incumbent governments. We're seeing that over and over again. And Shachi Kurl, James Moore, thank you very much.
Thanks, Ian.
Thank you.
Coming up, how China is leading the charge in the production of cheaper electric vehicles.
This was an intentional plan in China. Let's just leapfrog over the internal combustion engine where we can't compete.
Why Canada is trying to shut the door and what it means for Canadians. A government pumping the brakes on gas-powered vehicles, determined to convince Canadians to drive electric by 2035. So an announcement this week is leaving some consumers confused.
We will be introducing a 100% tariff on Chinese-made electric vehicles.
It could pull the plug on EVs people could actually afford. Producer Lauren Bird from CBC's About That explores why North America is trying to block a massive source of cheap electric vehicles.
Over the past few weeks, both the US and Canada have announced they'd be slapping massive tariffs on electric cars coming from China. And when I say massive, I mean a 100% tax. EVs from China are by far the cheapest on the market, even cheaper than most new gas cars in North America. So, at a time when both Canada and the US are trying to get everyone driving EVs in the next few years, why is North America closing the door on an ultra-cheap source?
I think the idea here is to protect this infant industry, this early industry that's being developed, but it comes at a cost to consumers.
Let's go through it. There are a couple reasons both Canada and the US are concerned about EVs coming from China. First is the sheer amount of cars the country is producing. China has become one of the biggest EV manufacturers in a really short period of time. Exports increased more than 1,000% from 2018 to 2023. Last year, the country exported nearly 1.6 million EVs, more than any other exporter.
This was an intentional plan in China. Let's just leapfrog over the internal combustion engine where we can't compete, where GM, BMW, and Volkswagen have the vast market share even in China, and let's see if we can become global players and dominate in the EV sphere.
But maybe the biggest threat to the North American market lies in just how cheap China is able to sell them for. For example, let's compare BYD, China's biggest EV maker, to US-based Tesla. According to Reuters, a few months ago, BYD listed a new version of the Atto 3 at less than $17,000 USD. Meanwhile, the cheapest Tesla you can buy right now in the US is about $45,000 USD. Both Canadian and American governments have argued that that price, $17,000, isn't market value. They say it's artificially low.
Actors like China have chosen to give themselves an unfair advantage in the global marketplace, so we're taking action to address that.
Simply put, we don't make anything in North America that could compete on that price scale.
And here's some insight into why. For one thing, they're subsidized heavily by the government. A recent report by a US think tank estimated the Chinese Communist Party provided over $230 billion US in subsidies to EV makers between 2009 and 2023. Those included things like buyer rebates, tax exemptions, R&D funding, and government procurement. Analysts say many of these companies also get ultra-low interest loans, and some even get direct financing from the state.
We're at the point where the subsidies can't be ruled out as a defining factor in how cheap these are.
Now, to be fair, Canada and the US do also subsidize EVs with pretty big tax breaks and rebates. But in China, it's not just the cars that are subsidized. It's the entire supply chain.
From the mineral development, mineral refining, to transportation, to shipping, it's subsidized across the board, so that helps. And the environmental standards are not as rigid in China, right? So they're producing these cars largely using coal-fired power, which is itself subsidized to keep prices low for these private car companies.
Another reason analysts say China's able to keep prices so low, multiple investigations have shown EV makers in China get their raw materials from what the Chinese government calls re-education camps, and what human rights activists call forced labor.
What is this Chinese policy of oversupply and overcapacity built on? You know what it's built on? It is built on abysmal labor standards, and it is built on abysmal environmental standards.
So given the subsidies, the environmental and labor standards, the argument is that Chinese companies would be able to flood the market with cheap EVs, and North American companies just wouldn't be able to compete.
There is a level of a plateau right now in terms of sales within China of electric vehicles. And so what does a company do that is just churning these things out with the help of subsidies? Well, they look for other countries to absorb that production.
The reality is China has an intentional state-directed policy of overcapacity and oversupply designed to cripple our own industries. We simply will not allow that to happen to our EV sector.
This crackdown on EV imports, according to government leaders, is first and foremost about protecting the future of the North American auto industry and the hundreds of thousands of people who work in it.
I'm determined that the future of electric vehicles will be made in America by union workers, period.
Whether tariffs will save those jobs is another question.
Whether it's going to have an impact protecting these manufacturers down the road remains to be seen. It really comes down to whether the manufacturers that will be operating EVs plants in Canada will offer products that actually resonate with the consumers.
When it comes to EVs, Canada doesn't exactly have a booming sector, but it is making significant investments toward that end, particularly in batteries. Right now, almost all the EVs sold here are made in the US. The big picture, though, is about a united North American front.
This automotive industry is totally integrated with the United States. It always has been, and it always will be.
Traditionally, cars and car parts get sent across the borders at several steps of manufacturing. What happens in one affects the other. The thinking is no different for EVs.
Canada, being a very integrated economy with the United States, There's a lot of pressure in Washington that Mexico and Canada not become kind of side doors or back doors for products like EVs. So that's largely what's going on here.
But here's where things get complicated. Because as I touched on earlier, both countries still do have ambitious goals when it comes to EVs, with very tight deadlines.
I don't see how we could possibly meet those goals because I don't think that the American or European automobiles can come in fast enough to replace the cheap cars at the lower price range that could come from China now.
By 2035 in Canada, it will be mandated that every single new car sold has to be electric. Right now, we're at about 11% a year, and that target is only a decade away. For a lot of potential buyers, it seems out of reach.
Electric vehicle price tags still give many consumers sticker shock.
It costs too much if the battery goes. It's a quarter of the cost of the car.
According to the Canadian Black Book, the average cost of a new car in Canada is around $66,000. For an EV, it's $73,000. So people just aren't buying them. As a result, many North American manufacturers are actually cutting their EV production. Now here's where the 100% tariff and the EV targets appear to clash. If there's no cheaper alternative on the market, how's the government going to get everyone buying electric cars in just a few years?
What we're seeing right now is we're in the early stages of a transition, but we've gone from 3 EVs in 2012 in the Canadian market to over 80 now in virtually every size and segment. So the vehicles are here, but the industry does need more time to allow these major investments, $40 billion and counting in Canada, to actually achieve their economies of scale.
So while the stated goal is to help protect the North American auto industry, it's likely there'll be ripple effects felt in at least 2 major ways.
Tariffs, generally speaking, are seen as a tax on consumers. Consumers will feel the pain of these measures.
You're reducing the choice for consumers, which means EVs produced in China, which currently means mostly Teslas, would be actually frozen out of the Canadian market.
The tariffs also raise the stakes for Canada's relationship with China.
These actions undermine China-Canada trade ties, harm Canadian companies and consumers' interests, and do no good to Canada's green transition and global climate response.
Experts have said we should prepare for retaliation.
The usual pattern for China is they look at what a country exports. Barley, canola, pork could be subject to tariffs because China knows that they can get these products elsewhere.
Canada needs to be ready for all manner of reactions, and we are.
A new 25% tariff on Chinese-made steel and aluminum was also part of this starting point. And next on the tariff horizon, the government is considering batteries, semiconductors, and solar panels, to name a few.
And one more note, Tesla, based in the U.S., does make some of its vehicles in China. A report this week suggested that Tesla unsuccessfully tried to convince the Canadian government to levy a lower tariff on its cars made there. A BC father and son have a close encounter with a pod of orcas.
This was like winning the lottery of whale watching.
The moment they knew they were witnessing something special. That's next in our moment. In West Vancouver's Horseshoe Bay, a chance sighting on the docks where a pod of orcas decided to make an appearance, with Randy and Lionel Jensen getting a front row view. Not only did father and son get a show, it lasted more than 20 minutes. And tonight, their incredible encounter is our moment.
We were down working on the boat, and I saw one of the staff at the marina running down the dock. I thought there might be an emergency. I was looking for smoke, and instead I saw spray up in the air and a big black fin.
Just to be so close, you know, and the 4 of them were going in different directions right in front of me, just kind of swarming. That big one would come by me, he would surface and take a breath, and his dorsal was right next to my face.
I think they're hunting you. I can tell you they're big. I think they weigh more than our boat, and they're just pretty spectacular to admire from a distance and even better up close. We were running back and forth across the breakwater, running alongside them, watching them dive underneath us.
I've been up close a couple of times, but this was like winning the lottery of whale watching.
You think of all the people who get on boats on both coasts not hunting for, but looking for whale sightings, and to have that long a sighting in a busy place like Horseshoe Bay, absolutely incredible. Thank you for being with us. You can watch anywhere, anytime on the free CBC News app and subscribe to the National's YouTube channel. I'm Ian Hannamansing in Vancouver. See you tomorrow night.